Today we're taking a look at another fan favorite archetype, those being DDDs, used by the main rival of Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, Reiji Akaba. And this archetype could have basically foreshadowed what the Yu-Gi-Oh! Reigns duels are going to be like, which are fantastic. I love all Reigns duels, they're all spectacular. And yeah, this is the duelist Reiji Akaba. When he used this archetype, he would usually make like very long turns where he would summon a bunch of powerful boss monsters all at once. And because of that, because how the archetype was translated into the real game rather well, the archetype ended up being meta relevant, and it is still meta relevant to this day. So yeah, I'm very glad to take a look at them. I thought they would be a bit bigger. They cap off at 60 cards. So yeah, let's take a look at them and let's see how the machine, how these fiends, not machines, tick. We start off with a level 1 DD Lamia. This is a level 1 tuner, which if this card is in your hand or graveyard, you can send one DD or Dark Contract card from your hand or face up from the field to the graveyard, except DD Lamia, then special summon this card, but banish it when it leaves the field. And you can only use this effect once per turn. This is basically a 3-off staple in any DD build because, well, DDD build, because free materials, easy special summoning condition, level 1 tuner, which you can special summon with 1-for-1. Easily builds up graveyard setup as well with its discard effect, or like revival effect I should say, because it doesn't necessarily need to be a discard most of the time. So yeah, it's overall a nice card, and it's even enables rank 1 plays, and is very splashable in some other decks as at some outside support. So yeah, good card. And our other level 1 non-pendulum monster is DD Necro Slime. If this card is in your graveyard, you can fusion summon one DDD fusion monster from your extra deck by banishing fusion materials listed on it from your graveyard, including this card. And you can only use this effect of DD Necro Slime once per turn. Yeah, we first got introduced to Lamia, now we have this. Basically, you can dump this thing into the graveyard with numerous things the archetype has, and along with Lamia and some other stuff we'll get into, this can you can basically summon any fusion monster if your other resources are basically well integrated at the time and well in your graveyard, which are probably gonna be by the time you have this thing in your graveyard during first turn 100% sure. And the other slime is Swirl Slime, their first level 2. And if this card is in your hand, you can fusion summon one DDD fusion monster from your extra deck by using monsters from your hand as fusion materials, including this card. And its other effect is that you can banish it from the graveyard in order to special summon a DD monster from your hand, and you can only use each effect once per turn. It's a nice card. Overall, it's basically an instant fusion monster if you happen to have it in your hand along with anything else, basically. And it's a bit of a bummer that you can only use this effect in order to use the only the monsters in the hand as material. I would have appreciated a bit more if you could actually use monsters on the field as well. But that would actually made it a bit too broken, since you can actually if you have somehow managed to trigger the some effects which allow you to use your opponent's monsters in order to do stuff, then it might have been a bit too powerful, I fear. But it's still a very nice card, and basically you can summon a fusion monster, and then it will hit the graveyard, and then you get to revive a monster from the graveyard, a DD monster at that, which will trigger the effect of one of the fusion monsters you'll most likely be summoning with this. So yeah, it's a fantastic card and should always be ran at 3 at all times. Next up we have DD Ghost. This is a level 2 tuner monster, and if it is sent to the graveyard, you can target one DD monster or Dark Contract card in your hand graveyard, except DD Ghost, and send one card from your deck to the graveyard with that name. And if this thing is banished, you can target one of your banished DD monsters or Dark Contract cards, except DD Ghost, return it to the graveyard. I would have appreciated more if the second effect was more akin to Eclipse Wyvern, which is currently banned, by the way. Where if this thing is banished, you get a banished card back into your hand, not just returning it back to the graveyard. Yeah, sure, you can return stuff to the graveyard in order to trigger its effect again by banishing it from the graveyard, but DDs rarely have those monsters. Like Swirl Slime and Necro Slime are so far the only monsters that benefits from, and we'll get to some other monsters which can be banished from the graveyard in order to like activate their effects, but they're a bit too far off in between. So yeah, if you're looking for a tuner, Lamia is the better option for now, although it can set up the graveyard for some fusion plays with the slime monster, so I guess a copy or two couldn't hurt. Next up we have their first level 3 DD Night Howl. When this card is normal summoned, you can target one DD monster in your graveyard and special summon it, and also you cannot special summon monsters for the rest of this turn except fiend type monsters. That monster's attack and defense becomes 0, and if it is destroyed you take 1000 damage. Which it probably won't be destroyed because this thing also happens to be a tuner, and you're most likely going to be reviving level 4 monsters with this in order to go into a level 7 synchro, which we'll get into later, which combos well with a certain fusion monster, which we'll also mention. Yeah, I'm not very subtle at this, but I'm not Arc 5, the king of foreshadowing, so yeah. Next up we have DD Baphomet on their first level 4. Once per turn you can target one DD monster you control that has a level except DD Baphomet and declare a level from 1 to 8. It becomes that level until the end of this turn, and also you cannot special summon monsters for the rest of this turn except DD monsters. It's basically a Gagaga magician, except it works on other monsters, and yeah, if you happen to have another Baphomet, you can basically make them the same level or whatever you need for your extra deck toolbox and Xyz spamming. So I guess there are better effects to go around. So yeah, you primarily run this because it's a level 4 which you can easily revive. And there are much better options in that department. Then one of said options is DD Lilith, level 4 with a 100 attack and 2100 defense, and if this card is normal or special summon, you can activate one of these effects, and you can only use this effect of DD Lilith once per turn. You can target one DD monster in your graveyard and add it to your hand, or you can add one face-up DD Pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand. So yeah, this is basically a level 4 which you'll most likely going to be using for your extra deck plays, because the revival it offers and the recursion it offers is just very good, and you basically don't want to pass out on it. So yeah, it's a fun card to pull off, and it's basically ran a 2 or 3 in basically any DD deck. And next up we have their first level 5 DD Pandora. When this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, or when this card is in your possession is destroyed by an opponent's card effect and sent to the graveyard, and you control no cards, you can draw 2 cards. Okay, so this card is not that good, honestly. If this thing was actually one level lower, I would have actually called it a very nice card, since if you bricked very hard and just had this in your hand, you can set this and pass, and if your opponent happens to destroy it, you get 2 nice cards. Since its defense is a tremendous 2100, which would be a very good defense value for a level 4 monster, but it's a level 5 and it's not very good, so you shouldn't run it. And now we jump to the level 7 monster, that being DD Vice Typhoon, or Typhon. Alright, I'm gonna say it Typhon. And when this card is normal summoned, you contribute one DD monster in order to special summon one level 7 DDD monster from your deck, and during your main phase, if this card is in the graveyard because it was sent there this turn, you can fusion summon one level 8 or higher DDD fusion monster from your extra deck by banishing fusion materials listed on it from your graveyard, including this card, and you can only use each effect of DD Vice Typhon once per turn. The first effect, even though it straight up enables you a free rank 7 play, is rarely pulled off because you're now never going to be normal summoning this most of the time, so it's kind of redundant. And yeah, there are decent level 7 DDD monsters which you tend to run in your deck, but again, you're not most likely not going to be normal summoning this thing in order to apply, and not to mention you need to tribute a DD monster in order to uh, in order to pull this effect off. However, you're most likely going to be using its graveyard effect a hell of a lot more, since this thing can banish itself along with some other monsters in order to perform a fusion summon of a high-level DDD monster. And there are some spectacular targets for this effect. So, yeah, this is usually ran at 1 or 2. Next up we have oh boy, this one drags us into the land of confusion, that being DDD Dragon King Pendragon. This is a level 7, and if this card is in your hand, you can tribute one dragon type monster and one other fiend monster from your hand and or side of the field. You special summon this card. Once per turn you can discard one card and this card gains 500 attack, then you can destroy one spell or trap on the field. And this the attack increase lasts until the end phase of this turn. When I say it drags you into the land of confusion, is the special summoning condition of this thing is barely impossible. Well, it's completely impossible because there are literally no dragon type monsters in this archetype, so I ask myself, what were they thinking when they designed this? And this thing itself isn't even a dragon, to make things worse, despite having dragon in the name. I'm not going to bother with this. It was actually a monster that was released in a structure deck, in that dual structure deck with like Yuya Declan structure deck with a 2-player thing where you can actually combine them into one big deck. Yeah. That deck ran a few dragons, but overall it was just no. Anyway, next up we have their final non-pendulum monster, that being DDD Supreme King Kaiser. They're also a level 7. And when this card is pendulum summoned, all face-up cards your opponent controls have their effects negated until the end of this turn. Once per turn during your main phase, if this card was pendulum summoned this turn, you can target up to 2 cards in your spell and trap zones, destroy them, and if you do, for each destroyed card, this card gains 1 additional attack during each battle phase this turn. Yeah, this is actually can be a pretty fun tech choice to go into, and well, to pendulum summon at a one-off, because negating all card effects on the turn can be pretty devastating. However, keep in mind that this also negates your own card effects, so be careful when bringing this thing out the pendulum way, because you can have an important combo maker negated, and then you'll be wondering why the hell isn't this working. However, you can, if you also happen to pendulum summon this very early and destroy 2 Dark Contract monsters, which were mentioned earlier, which is their support cards. Yeah, this thing basically gains 2 additional attacks and can be a pretty powerful beat stick, so yeah. Run by preference at 1 max, so yeah. Now moving on to their pendulum monsters. First up we have DD Savant Kepler. This is a level 1 with scale 10, 0 attack and defense. Its pendulum effect is that you cannot pendulum summon monsters except DD monsters, and this effect cannot be negated. And once per turn during your standby phase, reduce this card's pendulum scale by 2, minimum 1. Then destroy all monsters you control with a level greater than or equal to this card's pendulum scale except DD monsters. And its monster effect is that if it is normal or special summon, then you can activate one of these effects, and you can only use this effect once per turn. You can either add a Dark Contract card from your deck to your hand, or you can target one other DD card you control and return it to the hand. You basically use this in the for its monster effects, because it's a free searcher of the entire, well, the majority of the archetype's back row, and not to mention you can bounce back some of your back row in order to use their effects again if you haven't done that already, or if you have a floodgate, which probably you can't use because the opponent might have gotten rid of some stuff that make it useless, so you can save it for later, or basically save yourself from taking damage, because all Dark Contract monsters actually have effects which inflict 1000 damage to you during your standby phase. Also, you can bounce back your monsters in order to make use of their special summoning conditions, or basically reuse their summon effects. And yeah, this is basically a 3-off staple, and it is ran along with Lamia for rank 1 plays in other decks along with this deck. So yeah. Next up we have DD Arc, or the Dark. We have, this is a level 4, scale 1, with 0 attack and 2000 defense. And its pendulum effect is that you can target one pendulum summon monster your opponent controls, destroy that monster, also discard, and also this card gets destroyed. And you can only use this effect of DD Dark once per turn. And if this card is destroyed by a card effect, you can special summon one face-up DD pendulum monster from your extra deck except DD Arc, but negate its effects. You can only use this effect of DD Arc once per turn. And, I keep getting tongue wrapped, but the pendulum effect is barely going to be used because rarely anyone's pendulum summons these days. Just look at Reigns. Anyway, the monster effect may be more doable, but come on, good luck finding me someone who will waste a removal effect on this thing. I know it's just very inconsistent, but not to mention that this thing also specifically summons pendulum monsters, which you only run a few good pendulum monsters. They are most likely going to be using the monsters which can go to the graveyard, the ones we've covered now, such as Swirl Slime, Necro Slime, Night Howl, Lamia, basically anything that can be fetched back from the graveyard, and and its graveyard effect can be used. So yeah, don't bother with this one, and if you really feel like it, run one. Next up we have DD Evil, or the Devil. It's another level 4 with reverse stats of DD Arc, and has scale 8, and while this card is in your pendulum zone, pendulum effect, when your opponent pendulum summons a monster, you can activate this effect. That pendulum summoned monsters cannot attack, also negate its effects even if this card leaves the field. And its monster effect is that it cannot attack unless you control another DD monster. And during your opponent's main phase click effect, you can target one pendulum summon monster your opponent controls, negate its effects until the end of this turn. You can only use this effect of the DD Evil, or the Devil, once per turn. This card falls under the same category I said with DD Arc. Absolutely same problems are reappearing here. Rarely ever anyone's ever pendulum summons nowadays, and this time, like I said, we have a reverse case where its pendulum effect is a bit more useful, since the negation effect on that one is a bit is also permanent. So yeah, also run one if you really feel like it. Next up we have a pendulum staple, that being DD Orthos. It's a level 4, scale 3, and its pendulum effect is that you can target, once per turn you can target one spell or trap card on the field, and one DD or Dark Contract card you control and destroy them. And its monster effect is that when you take battle or effect damage, you can special summon this card from your hand. If this card is special summoned to your field, you cannot special summon monsters for the rest of this turn except Fiend type monsters. This card is genuinely a very good card because of the following reasons. Its pendulum effect is basically a scrap dragon effect, which you can actually use to trigger the effects of some monsters which have graveyard effects, or even DD Arc if you feel like it. And then you can bounce this thing back with stuff like Blackwing Zephyros the Elite in order to get a free monster. And then Zephyros the Elite with its own effect burns you for 500, which counts as effect damage, so you can special summon this onto the field. And it's overall a very amazing card and very much worth running. So yeah, 2 or 3 of these is the way I like it. And when we add one more head into the mix, Orthos becomes a Cerberus, DD Cerberus to be more precise, which is another level 4. This one has reverse stats of Orthos, scale 6 this time. And its pendulum effect is once per turn you can target one DD monster you control, change its level to 4, and if you do this, it gains 400 attack and defense even if this card leaves the field. And its monster effect is that when this thing is pendulum summoned from your hand, while you control a DD monster other than DD Cerberus, you can target one continuous spell card in your graveyard and add it to your hand. not that worth it, and like Orthos, because the pendulum effect is actually completely irrelevant, and not to mention that the pendulum scale of this thing has is way too small, and its monster effect might be pretty cool since it actually allows you to retrieve any continuous spell, so you might have some fun with some other splashability options which DDDs might benefit from, which I actually can't think many of, but whatever. The only relevant thing about this is it can be a bit of a large beat stick provided with some other monsters for their support, which is admirable but not very impressive, so yeah. Shame too, because this is a really cool design. Next up we have DD Savant Copernicus. This is a level 4, scale 1, 0 attack and defense. Its pendulum effect is that you cannot pendulum summon monsters except DD monsters. This effect cannot be negated. While this card is in your pendulum zone, you can negate an activated spell effect that would inflict damage to you, then destroy this card. And its monster effect is if it is normal or special summon, you can send one DD or Dark Contract card from your deck to the graveyard except DD Savant Copernicus. And you can only use this effect of DD Savant Copernicus once per turn. Basically, the summon effect is a built-in Foolish Burial and Foolish Burial Goods in one. And I'm not sure what in High Heavens is supposed to be the purpose of the first effect, because, well, you can negate Trickstar burn damage and stuff like Wave Motion Cannon, but then you like lose the card, and yeah, you can retrieve it later with something, but was it really worth it? Yeah, you'll most likely run a few copies of this for its summon effect if you're building a graveyard focused deck with these things. So yeah, and that was their last level 4. Now we move on to the level 5s. First up we have DD Proud Chevalier, a level 5. Scale 6, and its pendulum effect is that once per turn you can pay 500 life points, then target one face-up monster your opponent controls, and it loses 500 attack, even if this card leaves the field. And unless you have a DD card in your other pendulum zone, this card's pendulum scale becomes 5. And its monster effect is that when this card is normal summoned, you can add one face-up Dark Pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand. The first effect is something I would actually call somewhat relevant and decent if it wasn't for the fact that you have to normal summon this thing specifically, which makes it a huge pain in the ass in order to pull this effect off consistently, since it actually lets you add any face-up Dark Pendulum monster, which actually can provide, which actually this thing has some pretty decent targets for this thing's monster effect, but given the fact that it has to be normal summoned in order to apply the effect, makes it irrelevant. As for the first effect, the pendulum effect, it's also irrelevant since 500 attack isn't going to matter in the long run, since like nobody's gonna care for a minor attack reduction, not let alone one which requires you to pay 500 life points in order to do so. Yeah, not worth it. Next up we have on their first level 6 in the pendulum department, that being DD Proud Ogre. This is a level 6 with scale 8, and its pendulum effect is once per turn you can pay 500 life points, then target one DD monster you control. It gains 500 attack even if this card leaves the field, and his scale becomes 5 unless you control a DD monster in your other pendulum zone. And its monster effect is when it is normal summoned, you can special summon one face-up Dark Pendulum monster from your extra deck, but its effects are negated, and also you cannot special summon monsters for the rest of this turn except DD monsters. Much like Proud Chevalier, this has the same problem, and the pendulum effect is basically reversed, so I'm not going to talk about that. You can turn your monsters into formidable beat sticks, but they have way much power, and this minor power boost isn't really needed. And its monster effect also triggers on specifically normal summoning for some goddamn reason, and it special summons the Dark Pendulum monster, which is decent, but why do you have to negate its effects? I mean, you can block off some potential dangers by negating the effects of some monsters which might prove too much for the game to handle, and then that monster would end up on the ban list soon after. But that basically makes this card useless as well, so yeah. Oh, next up we have DD Savant Nikola, based on Nikola Tesla, the Croatian inventor. I know what I said, shut up. And this is also a level 6 with scale 8, 2000 attack and defense. And its pendulum effect is you cannot pendulum summon monsters except DD monsters. This effect cannot be negated, and once per turn you can discard one DDD monster. Then target one level 6 or lower DD monster you control. It gains 2000 attack and defense until the end of this turn, even if this card leaves the field. And its monster effect is if this card in the pendulum zone is destroyed, you can target one DDD monster you control, return it to the hand, and if you do, place up to 2 face-up DD pendulum monsters from your extra deck in your pendulum zones, but they cannot activate their pendulum effects this turn, and you can only use this effect once per turn. Yeah, I could see this used in a very heavily focused pendulum focused build, the monster effect specifically. Yeah, the only relevant thing about our boy Nikola here is that his pendulum effect can provide a pretty decent attack boost, which I would call good, but it specifically requires you to discard a DDD monster to the graveyard. And you might not have enough to go by, since the main deck is mostly populated by DD monsters, so yeah. And the monster effect basically exists in order to justify the spectacular infinite loop Reiji pulled off in the anime against Rajay, so yeah. I guess you could have been better. However, just like someone really wanted to accentuate that fact. DD Savant Thomas is their next monster. It's our first level 7, and it actually happens to be better than Nikola in this regard. It's a scale 6, and its pendulum effect is that during your main phase you can add one face-up DD pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand, and you can only use this effect once per turn. And its monster effect is that you can target one DD card in your pendulum zone, destroy that card, and if you do, special summon one level 8 DDD monster from your deck in defense position, but for the rest of this turn its effects, if any, are negated, and any battle damage your opponent takes is halved. And you can only use this effect once per turn. Pendulum effect is basically recovers any of a few pendulum monsters which you might be running in your DDDs, and the monster effect provides additional field presence and can enable rank 8 plays, which the archetype actually has a very spectacular rank 8 monster. I would have loved it a bit more if this thing was also a level 8 itself, which would make this thing and the monster it it summons into rank 8 materials, but here we are, I guess. It's still a great card, but I wish I wish our boy Tesla was better than this. Next up we have DDD Chaos King Apocalypse, and this is another level 7, scale 4. And its pendulum effect is that you can banish 2 DD monsters from your graveyard in order to special summon this card from your pendulum zone. And this effect is not once per turn, to be honest. And the monster effect is that during your opponent's turn, if this card is in your hand or graveyard, you can target 2 face-up spell or traps you control. You cannot special summon monsters for the rest of this turn except fiend monsters. Also destroy the targeted cards, and if you do special summon this card, this is a quick effect. And you can only use this effect once per turn. I find it interesting that the pendulum effect is not once per turn, because this archetype can provide a significant graveyard presence in order for this thing to be keep itself revived. So yeah, it can be a rank 7 target in that regard. And along with Lamia, you can make a level 8 synchro. So yeah, it's a card worth experimenting with, so yeah, you can also destroy your dark contracts, which you don't need to free up your spell and trap zone, so yeah, run 1 or 2 of these by preference. Next up we have DDD Super Sight King Zero Maxwell. I think this is their final level 7, oh no it's not. And it's level 7, scale 4. its pendulum effect is that you can target one face-up monster on the field and changes the defense to 0 until the end of this turn, even if this card leaves the field, and you can only use this effect once per turn. And its monster effect is that before damage calculation, if this card attacked an opponent's defense position monster, you can change the defense of the opponent's monster to 0 until the end of the damage step. And if this card attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing battle damage to your opponent, and you take no battle damage from attacks involving this card. I'm not going to talk further about this thing because it's a monster that entirely focuses on defense points in a Link era, where defense points are basically non-existent, so no, not worth it. Next up we have DDD Rebel King Leonidas. This is another level 7, scale 3. And its pendulum effect is that when you take effect damage except during the damage step, you can destroy this card, and if you do, any effect damage that would inflict damage to a player this turn increases their life points by the same amount instead. When you take effect damage, monster effect, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, gain life points equal to the damage you took, and you take no effect damage while this card is on the field. This is a card which you basically put in your deck if you have room for it, because again, you can actually special summon this thing with Zephyros, but that's the thing, finding the room for this guy can be a bit of a hindrance since your deck is most likely filled up with so many other better options. It's a level 7 which enables rank 7 plays, and yeah, again, run by preference and if you can actually find room for it. Next up we have DD Savant Newton. This is another level 7, and this is the final level 7 now. It's a scale 10, and its pendulum effect is that you cannot pendulum summon monsters except DD monsters, and this effect cannot be negated. And once while this card is in your pendulum zone, you can negate an unactivated trap card that will inflict damage to you, then destroy this card. And its monster effect, that is, when you can discard this card, then target one DD or Dark Contract card in your graveyard except DD Savant Newton, add it to your hand. You can only use this effect once per turn. Again, the pendulum effect ain't gonna be relevant unless you're playing against Trickstars who don't even have trap cards which inflict damage. And you basically run this thing because of its monster effect, just like Copernicus, so yeah. Next up we have DDD Oblivion King Abyss Ragnarok. This is a scale 5, level 8, and its pendulum effect is that if you special summon a DD monsters except during the damage step, you can target one DD monster in your graveyard. Any battle damage your opponent takes becomes halved for the rest of this turn. Also special summon that monster. And if you do take 1000 damage, you can only use this effect once per turn. If this card is monster effect, if this card is normal or special summon, you can target one DDD monster in your graveyard, special summon it. You can only use this effect of DDD Oblivion King Abyss Ragnarok once per turn. Once per turn, you can tribute one other DD monster, then target one monster your opponent controls, banish it. Yeah, this is basically another 3-off staple in the archetype because level 8 makes it a trade-in target. Then, if it is normal or special summon, basically revives any DDD monster from your graveyard. Most likely a level 8 monster, which allows you to go into some rank 8 monsters. But you're most likely going to be using this as material for Link plays or Fusion plays. So, yeah, it's basically a card very welcome in the deck and should always be ran at 3. Next up we have the Ace monster, the rival Ace monster of Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, that being DDD Doom King Armageddon, which is the only rival Ace monster to this day which is not a dragon. I know. This is a scale 4 monster, level 8, and its pendulum effect is once per turn you can target one DD monster you control. It gains 800 attack until the end of this turn, even if this card leaves the field. And its monster effect is that once per turn, if a monster you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can target one of those monsters. This card gains attack equal to that monster's original attack until the end of this turn. And also this thing cannot be destroyed by this thing cannot attack your opponent directly during the turn this effect is activated, and it cannot be destroyed by spell or trap effects that do not target it. Okay, so basically it's also a monster you basically run if you can actually find space for it. And yeah, it actually has a pretty interesting protection effect on it. it does not. It doesn't include monster effects as well. God knows why. And basically, if you destroy a monster, the more monsters you destroy, this thing becomes a bigger beat stick. So yeah, it's basically a warning to your opponent not to mess with you. So yeah, run by preference, in my opinion. Next up, we have DD Savant Galilei, their first level 10 monster. 0 attack and defense, scale 1, and you cannot pendulum summon monsters except DD monsters, and this effect cannot be negated. And once per turn during your standby phase, increase this card's pendulum scale by 2, max 10. Then destroy all monsters you control with a level less than or equal to this card's pendulum scale except DD monsters. And its monster effect is during either player's turn, you can discard this card and target one DD or Dark Contract card you control, return it to the hand, and you can only use this effect of Galilei once per turn. The monster effect is basically outclassed by Kepler, and this thing's the monster effect is basically only used if you need the Kepler's effect to be a quick effect for some reason, which you most likely don't. You can basically use it as a saving grace when you're about to run out of life points, and then you bounce back a Dark Contract, which would inflict the final blow, which rarely happens, in DDDs, so no. Next up, we have DDD Destiny King Zero Laplace. This is another level 10, scale 1, and its pendulum effect is during your main phase, you can add one face-up DDD pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand, except this thing, and you can only use this effect once per turn. And its monster effect is you can special summon this card from your hand by tributing a DDD monster. If this card battles an opponent's monster before damage calculation, you can make this thing's card's attack become double the original attack of the opponent's monster it's battling until the end of the damage step. If this card attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing damage, and the first time this card would be destroyed by battle each turn it is not destroyed. Also, you take no battle damage from that battle. It's basically a special summonable beat stick and nothing else. It basically inflicts the monster's attack points as damage. So yeah, you basically use this thing as a out to some gigantic beaters which cannot be targeted or destroyed by card effects, which are plentiful occasionally, mind you, but not enough to warrant running more than one of these. So yeah. Also, it's a nice bonus that this thing can avoid destruction once per turn, and that it prevents battle damage from battles involving it. So I guess there are worse things to consider. And to close off the main deck, oh boy, we have a spectacular monster. Here we have Divine God Zero King. Okay, let me go again. Divine God Zero King Zero God Ragey. Oh my god, that's such a cool name, and a bit of a mouthful there. Okay, this is a level 10, scale 0, and its pendulum effect is the first time you would take effect damage each turn, you do not. Each turn, one level 5 or higher DD monster you normal summon can be summoned without tributing. You can only use each effect of each pendulum effect of Divine God Zero King Zero God Ragey once per turn. Good God. One cannot be destroyed by battle monster effect. Also, you take no battle damage from battles attacks involving this card. When this card declares an attack while your opponent's life points are 4,000 or less, you can make this card gain attack equal to your opponent's life points until the end of this turn. You can tribute one other monster, special summon one of those, apply one of these effects until the end of this turn. Either this card can attack directly, or your opponent cannot activate cards or effects of their spell and trap zones, or your opponent cannot activate their card effects from the hand or graveyard. Yeah, this is actually a pretty bombastic final boss monster, well, for the main deck, that is. The name, while it is lanky and a bit unpractical to say multiple times, it's so badass and awesome. It basically Reiji turns into this monster in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 manga, and yeah, it's a pretty bombastic boss monster. It's certainly worth a spot or two in the in your deck, but be careful if you go first when you open up with this thing, because yeah, it doesn't offer any additional benefits. So yeah, feel free to run a few of these if you feel like it. I advise you, really. It's so spectacular. Next up we have, oh, now we're moving on to the extra deck. First up we have the fusion monsters. First up we have DDD Flame King Genghis. This is a level 6 which requires 2 DD monsters. And if another DD monster is special summoned to your field while you control this face-up card except during the damage step, you can target one DD monster in your graveyard in order to, and special summon it. And you can only use this effect while DDD Flame King Genghis once per turn. And if this card is destroyed by battle, or if this card is in his own possession is destroyed by an opponent's card effect, you can target a Dark Contract card in your graveyard and add it to your hand. Yeah, this is basically one of the first monsters you actually go into in order to build up such insane field presence as the Archetype is very well known for. Its following effect is cute, although you're barely going to be using it, since you're going to be using it this thing as material for some higher DDs or DDDs. So yeah, this is a definite staple in DDDs. Next up we have another fusion, DDD Oracle King Dark, and all the same summoning condition except it has 800 more attack points. And its only effect is that any effect that would inflict damage to you makes you gain that much life points instead. Well, it disables Trickstars very well, but the main purpose of this thing is to negate the effects of Dark Contract cards, and there are better ways of going around that, so this card is not that much worth running. Next up we have DDD Dragonbane King Beowulf, and this is their first level 8, and Oracle King Dark is a level 7, sorry. And this one requires a DDD monster and a DD monster as materials. And if a DD monster you control attacks the defense position monster, inflict piercing and battle damage to your opponent, and once per turn during your standby phase you can destroy all cards in the spell and trap zones. It's basically a once per turn heavy storm effect, which is very nice, and it also gives your monsters some nice piercing damage, not to mention this thing itself has 3000 attacks, so it's another welcome choice to run in your deck. So yeah, good card. Next up we have DDD Flame High King Genghis. This is a level 8, which requires a level 5 or higher DD monster and a DD monster as material. And if another DD monster is normal or special summoned to your side of the field while you control this monster except during the damage step, you can target one DD monster in your graveyard, special summon it, and you can only use this effect once per turn. And once per turn when a spell or trap card is activated, quick effect, you can negate the activation. Okay, so this is a three-off staple for multiple reasons. First of all, it's a straight upgrade over a small Genghis, which is still a staple of its own. Basically includes any form of summon when this thing with this thing's recursion effect, and not to mention it has a once per turn spell or trap negation, and yeah, which also happens to be a quick effect. So yeah, it's a very fantastic boss monster. However, it's a bit of a rare case of the second effect being used, since you're also probably going to be using these things occasionally as material for some higher monsters, but still, he gets left on the field pretty often, so yeah, the protection is pretty well deserved there. Next up we have DDD Wave Oblivion King Caesar Ragnarok. This is the first level 10 monster. It requires 2 DDD monsters as materials. And once per turn when an attack is declared involving this card, you can target one other DD or Dark Contract card you control, return it to the hand, and if you do, equip one face-up monster your opponent controls to this card except the battling monster. This card gains attack equal to the combined original attack of the monsters equipped to it by this effect. It's an archetypal Destiny Hero Plasma, and yeah, in terms of how boss monsters goes, it's a pretty alright boss monster. It can be a very nice game ender in terms of, well, hitting very hard, because this thing doesn't necessarily need to be attacked itself in order to apply this effect. You can just attack with this thing and then use this thing's effect in order to fetch a monster from the opponent's field in order to make this thing a very good beat stick. So yeah, one or two of these as the big heavy option. And their final fusion monster is the Fusion Pendulum monster, DDD Super Doom King Purple Armageddon. This is level 10 as well, scale 1. Its pendulum effect is that once per turn before damage calculation, if your DDD fusion monster battles an opponent's monster, you can make that opponent's monster lose 1000 attack until the end of this turn, even if this card leaves the field. And its monster effect is that it requires 2 DDD monsters as material, and you can target one attack position monster your opponent controls, destroy it, and if you do, inflict damage to your opponent equal to half its original attack. You can only use this effect of the once per turn, and before damage calculation, if an opponent's monster battles, you can make its attack become equal to its original attack until the end of the damage step. If this card in the monster zone is destroyed, place it in your pendulum zone. The pendulum effect is barely ever going to be used because it specifically requires fusion monsters in that battle, which again is nice, but I would have appreciated if it applied against any extra deck monster. But I guess, but the monster effect is something that more than makes up for it. It basically can get rid of powerful monsters, burn the opponent for some significant damage, and yeah. If the opponent is charging into you with an honest or something, you can basically negate that honest by resetting the monster's attack back into the original attack value. So yeah, again, run by preference because it can be a bit gimmicky at times. Next up we have DDD Gust King Alexander, the first Synchro monster. It's a level 7, requires a DD tuner and one or more non-tuner monsters. And if another DD monster is normal or special summoned to your field while you control this face-up card except during the damage step, you can target one level 4 or lower DD monster in your graveyard and special summon, and they can only use this effect once per turn. You will basically run this on the same principle as the two Genghis monsters. Basically play extenders at their finest and should always be ran in significant numbers, so yeah. Their first level 8 is DDD Cursed King Siegfried. Requires a tuner and one or more non-tuner DD monsters. And during either player's turn, you can target one face-up spell or trap on the field. That target has its effects negated until the end of the next standby phase. You can only use this effect once per turn, and if this card is destroyed by battle or card effect and sent to the graveyard, gain 1000 life points for each Dark Contract card you control. The second effect is pretty irrelevant. There's actually a trap card that outclasses this thing's second effect. And the first effect is alright. I mean, you can basically negate a Dark Contract, which would burn you for some damage, but you can also negate the opponent's flight gates with this thing, so the options here if you want to take it. It is also a pretty significant beat stick, so yeah, run by preference. Next up we have DDD Gust High King Alexander. And this is a level 10 with 3000 attack and 2500 defense. Completely generic, and if 3 or more DDD monsters are on the field, this card gains 3000 attack. If another DD monster is special, normal or special summoned to your field while this monster is on the field except during the damage step, you can target one DD monster in your graveyard and special summon it, and you can only use this effect once per turn. The second this thing is basically the original Alexander with the added effect of getting a freaking 3000 attack point boost if you happen to have 3 DDD monsters, including this thing, on the field, which is, mind you, not very hard to do. So yeah, this is the primary beat stick you used in your DDDs, so yeah, run it, absolutely max out on it because the card is just that good. And the final synchro monster is DDD Super Doom King Bright Armageddon. Another level 10, this one is a scale 1, and as well, actually, as the fusion one. Its pendulum effect is that once per turn when an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can target one DDD synchro monster you control, destroy as many monsters your opponent controls as possible with defense less than or equal to the targeted monster's attack, and if you do, inflict 1000 damage to your opponent for each monster destroyed. And monster effect is that it requires a DD tuner and one or more non-tuner DDD monsters. And your opponent cannot target monsters you control with card effects. If another monster is normal or special summoned while this card is on the field except during your damage step, you can make your opponent choose one pendulum monster they control, and all other monsters they currently control have their effects negated, and if this card in the monster zone is destroyed, you can place this card in your pendulum zone. This one's a bit better than the fusion monster because, first of all, this thing actually protects all of your monsters from being targeted by card effects, which is something rarely anyone does, and that's why I commend it. The pendulum effect is also a bit better, but than the fusion monsters. But it's not going to be used all that often. And the second effect is downright silly. Your opponent has to pick a pendulum monster they control in order for the effect to apply. Not to mention that the pendulum monster doesn't even do anything after it hasn't been picked. It basically exists as a form of like insurance that the opponent has to have a pendulum monster in order to for this effect to go off. Although you could like argue that the effect, if it wasn't locked into pendulum monsters, could be a bit too powerful, but yeah, I guess that makes sense then. Now moving on to the Xyz monsters. First up we have DDD Stone King Darius. This is a rank 3 which requires 2 level 3 fiend type monsters. And once per turn during either player's turn, you can detach one Xyz material from this card, then target one dark contract card you control, destroy it, and if you do, draw one card. If this card battles an opponent's monster during damage calculation, you can detach one Xyz material from this card, make this card unable to be destroyed by that battle, or destroy the opponent's monster and that battled it after damage calculation, and if you do, inflict 500 damage to your opponent. This card is overall a very nice card, but actually the worst thing about this thing is its summoning condition. First of all, it's a rank 3, and DDDs really struggle with putting multiple level 3s on the field. And not to mention that they have to be specifically fiend type monsters. And not helping the fact is the fact that the tour guide from the underworld is still limited. So, yeah. But as the effect itself, it's pretty damn good. You can destroy the dark contracts which you don't need, and you basically get a free draw out of it, which is always appreciated, so yeah. But because of its summoning condition, and because tour guide is still limited, I wouldn't advise running any more than one. Next up we have the rank 4 DDD Wave King Caesar. This one requires 2 level 4 fiend type monsters, and during either player's turn, you can detach one Xyz material from this card at the end of the battle phase, special summon from your graveyard as many monsters destroyed this turn as possible. But during your next standby phase, take 1000 damage for each monster special summoned by this effect. And if this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can add one dark contract card from your deck to your hand, and you can only use each effect once per turn. What I like about the first effect is, well, it's a bit slow, but what I like about it a lot is that it actually special summons all monsters that were destroyed this turn by any means, including monsters by battle and card effects, including your own card effects. So yeah, you can actually build up a ridiculous field presence, and along with stuff like IP Masquerena, you can go into some serious link plays. So I guess this thing works. It's a soul charge, so you take 1000 damage, of course, and if this thing happens to leave the field, you get to search a dark contract, which is also a nice plus, so yeah, decent card. It's not that hard of a staple like the other kings, but it's certainly high up there. Next up we have DDD Marksman King Tell. This is a rank 5, a completely generic one at that. And you can also Xyz summon this card by using a rank 4 DDD Xyz monster you control as an Xyz material and transfer the materials. And once per turn during either player's turn, if you took any effect damage this turn, you can detach one Xyz material from this card and target one face-up monster on the field. It loses 1000 attack and defense, and if it does, inflict 1000 damage to your opponent. And if this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can send one DDD or Dark Contract card from your deck to the graveyard. Not exactly worth running because, okay, the most relevant or way you're going to be triggering this thing's effect is via Zephyros the Elite or Trick Clown, and yeah, all you do is knock a monster's attack by 1000, which does not matter for much. I mean, you can use the Wave King Xyz as material and detach it in order to get a search out of it as well. But yeah, it's not that much of an amazing card, and its floating effect is basically outclassed by several other cards in the archetype, so not really worth that much spots in the extra deck, if not one spot at all. So yeah. And next up we have the first rank 6 DDD Wave High King Caesar. This one requires 2 level 6 Fiend monsters, and when a spell or trap card or monster effect is activated, it includes an effect of that special summons a monster quick effect. You can detach one material from this card, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. Then you can make one other DD monster you control and discard, gain 1800 attack until the end of this turn, and if this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can add one Dark Contra card from your deck to your hand. The floating effect is the same as the regular Caesar, but the first effect, which surprisingly isn't once per turn even, is surprisingly very powerful. First of all, you can basically negate any effect that will special summon a monster, which are very plentiful, and not to mention that this thing can basically turn into a massive beat stick and can turn another monster into a very massive beat stick. It all is until the end of the turn, but you're most likely going to be using this on the opponent's turn, so you're going to lose the attack boost. So yeah, but it can serve a decent use in a pinch when you're like beating the opponent to death, and then he plays something like a quick play or a monster effect that would special summon a monster. Then you punish your opponent by making this thing into an even greater beat stick. So yeah, it's also a nice card and definitely worth running in your extra deck toolbox. Next up, we have another very spectacular card, that being DDD Duodon King Kali Yuga. This is a rank 8, which requires 2 level 8 DD monsters, and after this card is Xyz summoned, for the rest of this turn, other cards and their effects cannot be activated on the field, and other cards and effects on the field are negated. Once per turn during either player's turn, you can detach one Xyz material from this card, destroy all spell or trap cards on the field, and you can detach one material from this card, then target one Dark Contra spell or trap in your graveyard and set that target to your field. Yeah, this is a very, very powerful boss monster. 3500 attack, rank 8, super easy to summon, negates harder than anything in the game, and basically if you have 5 face downs, unless like one of them is like a solemn strike or solemn warning, they're all useless and completely irrelevant, as this thing vaporizes everything in existence. It's one of the better monsters you can actually go into, and it's basically a game ender on the right circumstances and setup, which basically makes it worth running. Absolutely max out on this guy. Next up we have the final Xyz monster, the Xyz Pendulum DDD Supreme King, Super Doom King Dark Armageddon. It's a scale 1 as well, rank 8. And its pendulum effect is once per turn. If you have a DD card in your other pendulum zone, you can special summon one DDD Xyz monster from your extra deck except DDD Super Doom King Armageddon. And its monster effect is that it requires 2 level 8 DDD monsters, and it cannot be pendulum summoned. When this card is Xyz summoned, you can attach one face-up DD Pendulum monster from your extra deck to this card as material. Pendulum monsters you control cannot be destroyed by card effects. Once per turn, you can detach one material from this card and target one monster your opponent controls equal to the number of pendulum monsters you control. Destroy them, and if this card in the monster zone is destroyed, you can place it in your pendulum zone. Okay, so fun fact, this is actually the only pendulum Xyz monster which cannot be pendulum summoned for some reason. And while the removal can be fairly devastating, it still depends on the number of pendulum monsters on the field, which tend to be not much, in the not much department, so the effect can be a bit of a dead hindrance there. But you can basically make some use out of its effect, as you're most likely going to be getting at least one destruction. So Yeah, it also protects all your pendulums from card effects, which is also not that relevant since you most likely run the non-pendulum monsters in this deck, so yeah. Also run by preference in my opinion. And their final monster in general, the final extra deck monster is DDD Abyss King Gilgamesh, a Link monster. This is a Link 2, points bottom left and bottom right, 1800 attack, requires 2 DD monsters. And if this card is special summoned, you can place 2 DD pendulum monsters with different names from your deck in your pendulum zones. And if you do, take 1000 damage. Also, you cannot special summon monsters for the rest of this turn except DD monsters. If this Link summoned card is destroyed by an opponent's attacking monster and an opponent's card effect, sorry, you can special summon 1 DD monster from your extra deck or graveyard in defense position. Okay, sorry, it caught me off. I apparently have a time limit of recording for 1 hour. Yeah, this video is over 1 hour now. Let's see how long it'll be in total. Maybe longer than the rocket video. I was saying you can special summon 1 DD monster from your extra deck or graveyard in defense position. You can only use each effect once per turn. Yeah, this is a very popular choice in DDDs because it's a monster that basically enables your plays in the Link era. It's still not part of the TCG for some reason, and the TCG players are weeping for this thing to be important in the TCG, basically. And I really pray that this does hit the TCG soon, including Needle Fiber. And yeah, it's a nice support card from one of the earliest Link Reigns packs, and definitely enables DDDs to be relevant even in the Link era. Alright, time for the back row. First up we have Dark Contract with a Gate, the continuous spell card that during your main phase you can add 1 DD monster from your deck to your hand, and you can only use this effect once per turn, and the standard 1000 burn as all Dark Contracts have during the standby phase. Simple monster searching each turn, and basically you run 3 of these. Next up we have Dark Contract with the Swamp King. During your main phase, you can fusion summon 1 Fiend type fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field as fusion materials, and you can only use this effect once per turn. And if summoning a DD fusion monster this way, you can also banish monster from your graveyard as fusion material and the burn effect. Basically an archetypal fusion spell and a continuous one, and that also allows you to use graveyard monsters as material. That's why you basically run a lot of non-pendulum monsters in this archetype, so yeah. Then we have the Forbidden Dark Contract with the Swamp King. Once per turn, you can special summon 1 DDD monster from your hand in defense position, but its effects are negated, and once per turn you can fusion summon 1 Fiend type fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field as fusion materials, including a monster special summoned by the discard with the above effect. And the burn this time is 2000 damage actually, which is... why? I mean, you can special summon a monster which you can actually go into a Link monster or a fusion monster with this thing's effect, but that's about all it does. It's basically a Dark Contract with the Swamp King with an additional monster you can special summon, which the archetype can do pretty easily on their own without the aid of this thing, so if you run this, it's probably not more than 1. Next up we have Dark Contract with the Entities. When a DDD monster of the below card type is special summoned from the extra deck to your field, you can activate the appropriate effect once per turn. Fusion, gain 1000 life points. Synchro, your opponent cannot target that special summon monster with card effects. Xyz, banish 1 card from the field or the graveyard. Pendulum, draw 1 card, then discard 1 card. And once per turn, standard burn, except it's 2000 damage as well. I'm not sure what they were intending to do with this thing. The fusion is completely pointless. Synchro is actually pretty decent. Xyz can be good against very specific decks. And Pendulum is just... well, I mean, it's the Dark World Dealings effect, but it's overall not worth it. Also, you take 2000 damage per turn, so good luck. And their final spell card is Dark Contract with the Yamimakai. Once per turn during your standby phase, take 1000 damage, standard burn effect. And you can only use the following effects of Dark Contract with the Yami Makai once per turn, and once that turn. During your main phase, you can target one DD Pendulum monster in your graveyard, place it in your Pendulum zone. And during your main phase, you can place one face-up DD Pendulum monster from your extra deck in your Pendulum zone. Again, the deck rarely focuses on pendulums, and first of all, pendulum monsters in this archetype rarely ever do end up in the graveyard, so this card is kind of redundant in that regard. Just like the original Yami Makai, it's worthless. Next up, we have the first trap card, Dark Contract with the Witch. You can send one DD or Dark Contract card from your hand to the graveyard, then target one card on the field and destroy it. You can only use this effect once per turn, and all Fiend-type monsters you control gain 1000 attack during your opponent's turn only, and the standard 1000 burn effect. It's actually a pretty fun effect. Yeah, basically gives your monsters a stack in order to protect them from attacks of the opponent, and the first effect is basically a once per turn card pop, which is always nice. Definitely worth running. I would have I loved it a bit more if it was actually a spell card, but that would actually made it a bit too broken in my opinion. Maybe since you can access it a bit easier. So yeah. Next up, we have Dark Contract with the Errors. Once per turn, if you control a DD monster, you can negate all trap card effects on the field other than discards for the rest of this turn, even if this card leaves the field and the standard 1000 damage. Or you can just don't do that and just run Royal Decree if you really feel like it. I mean, it is archetypal since you can actually abuse it, but if you really want to negate trap effects, then you basically run Royal Decree, and that's the end of it. It doesn't even burn you for 1000 damage, so it's better in that regard. And the final Dark Contract is Dark Contract with the Eternal Darkness. While you have 2 DD cards in your Pendulum zones, your opponent cannot target monsters on the field with spell or trap effects, tribute them for a tribute summon, nor use them as the materials for a fusion, synchro, or Xyz summon. Once per turn during your standby phase, take 1000 damage, which is the standard burn effect. I would have loved if this tribute clause actually referred as your opponent cannot tribute monsters in general, because this would make this card miles better since you can use it to protect yourself from kaijus. But it doesn't, which makes it way less splashable. So yeah. But actually, all the other effects this thing offers are actually pretty sweet and warrant running a copy or two of this. So yeah. Alright, those were all the Dark Contracts, but we still have some cards left to look at. First of which is Contract Laundering. Destroy as many Dark Contract cards in your spell and trap zones as possible, and if you do, draw the same number of cards you destroyed. Then gain 1000 life points for each card you drew with this effect. I don't usually see many builds running this, but this can actually be a pretty spicy comeback option, as you can just literally destroy all your Dark Contracts for a potential 4 cards and 4000 life points, and you can actually get yourself kickstarted back into the game. So yeah, if you find space for this, it doesn't hurt at 1. Next up, we have DDD Contract Change. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, activate one of these effects. Either banish one DDD monster from your graveyard, and if you do, the attacking monster loses attack equal to the banished monster's attack, or you can add one level 4 or lower DD Pendulum monster from your deck to your hand. I'm surprised that this thing is also a search card for some reason. Like, didn't they learn from Gleipnir at all? The first effect is actually a very good disruption effect, since you can mostly knock the opponent's attack points straight down to 0. And the best thing about this effect is actually that the attack loss is permanent, so you're basically incentivized to set up your graveyard with some large beatsticks, which you can then proceed to banish into the graveyard in order to knock down the attack points of your opponent's monster significantly. The bummer is that the opponent specifically needs to attack in order to activate this effect, and that also goes for the search effect. So in that regard, Gleipnir is a bit better, as much as it pains me to say it. Next up we have DDD Human Resources. Shuffle 3 cards into the deck and any combination of DD monsters in your hand, field, or graveyard and DD cards in your pendulum zone. Then add 2 DD monsters from your deck to your hand. In terms of searching, it's better than DDD Contract Change for sure. Also, it actually shuffle functions as a multifunctional magical mallet and Pot of Avarice and Pot of Riches, whatever you need. And yeah, however, it's still a bit too slow due to it being a trap card, so running 1 or 2 of these is usually how you do it. Their next card is DD Recruits. If your opponent controls more monsters than you do, target any number of DD monsters and or Dark Contract cards in your graveyard up to the difference. Add those cards to your hand. You can only use this effect of DD you can only activate 1 DD Recruits per turn. Sorry. I would have loved it if this thing was actually a spell card, because it would make this thing would be an ideal first turn option for you, because you can actually summon some monsters, set up the graveyard, and then basically recover back your losses with, I don't know, stuff like Swirl Slime, Necro Slime, anything basically that dumps things into the graveyard. So yeah, as it is now, it's a fun little one-off if you want to play it casually. So yeah, you can also play it competitively, but it's a bit too slow for my taste. So yeah. And their final card, finally, is DD Reroll, a continuous trap. Dark Contract cards you control cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. You can banish this card from your graveyard and target up to 3 of your banished DD cards and shuffle them into the deck. I would have loved it if you could actually draw 1 card after that, but I guess this works. It also protects your Dark Contract cards from being destroyed by the opponent's card effects, which I appreciate. But then, this is a continuous trap after all, and you're losing a valuable space for a Dark Contract, which you might need at the moment. So, yeah, it's a bit of a gamble to make, so that's why you need to make that reroll. Okay, finally we've made it to the grading scale. In terms of consistency, there are absolutely 0 complaints. The decks and all the DD builds I've seen can open up very well in basically 99.9% of all situations, so I'm obliged to give them a 3 out of 3 in that regard. Power also gets a 3 out of 3 because, well, the main deck has very low attack monsters, but those can turn into significant beat sticks, and not to mention those beat sticks also have very nice play extender effects, so that also is a huge plus in my book. Comeback ability can be a bit cloggy at times and slow due to the lack of proper comeback tools available at any given situation. So some specific comeback tools akin to a very specific situation are what this archetype mostly relies on, and those can be a bit too tricky to find at the appropriate time, like I said, so I give them a 2 out of 3 in that regard. Protection is mostly there. It's some of their higher boss monsters do have some solid protection effects, and but the fact remains that they are not usually ran at very big ratios in order to for the field to be populated with so many good protection effects. This deck was designed to beat hard and beat very, very hard, along with providing impressive boards and plays which everyone can watch in amazement. So yeah. So sadly, I have to give protection a 1 out of 3 in that regard. In terms of versatility, well, Lamia and Kepler are splashable, and along with Contract with the Gate are splashable in various rank 1 pools. But other than that, the archetype isn't splashable in basically anything. But you can basically build various decks involving this archetype. So I guess it's enough for me to give them a 2 out of 3 in that regard. So yeah, those were DDDs, and yeah, it was an archetype done well, and it still holds up pretty decently today. Stay tuned until the next time, as we'll be taking a look at Black Wings, the legendary Yu-Gi-Oh archetype. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for more videos and updates. Comment, like, and subscribe. And as usual, I'll upload the next video whenever I can. See you all. Have a good day and peace.